They might talk about humor, music, film, books, football and box sets, exercise and maybe even food, trivia and sports, politics and health, sometimes well-being too. On the Life with Brian. On the Life with Brian.
Hello and welcome to Life with Brian, a podcast with an ex-footballer called Brian and absolutely nothing to do with Monty Python, although sometimes we do have our moments. Joining me, Marc, is my fellow co-producer and host, Matthew. How are you, Matthew?
Good, thanks, Marc. Great to be here, as always.
Fantastic. And the aforementioned ex-footballer is, of course, Manchester United and Celtic icon Brian McClare. How are you, sir? Have you got any new chutneys on the go since our last episode?
No, I've got some raspberry jam planned for some time when I get a minute, but I'm thrilled to have the guest that we are about to speak to this evening.
That's right. Well, we do have a special guest as always, and this time we have a journalist and broadcasting legend who has graced our airwaves and TV sets for over 50 years, most notably presenting shows on BBC Radio 1, 2, 6 Extra, Radio Luxembourg, and of course hosting the iconic television music programme The Old Grey Whistle Test in the 1970s. He's also got an OBE, which goes nicely with our 3 previous MBE recipients. So we've nearly got the full set. So it's a warm welcome to Whispering Bob Harris. Thanks for joining us, Bob. Are you well?
Yes, I am. I'm really so happy to be here. I've been really looking forward to this.
Oh, you're still saying that at the end of the programme, Bob. Can I take you back to 1978, right? And you will turn out a moment in my life that was very enjoyable and incredibly embarrassing at the same time. I don't know how I persuaded my parents to allow me to stay up and watch the whistle test, because we used to get packed off the bed at 9 o'clock, even though then I was 14. So I'm sitting on the floor, transfixed, waiting for the programme to come on, and I think that the first music to come on was the Ramones, which was just incredible. You know, we had heard lots of different bits and pieces of music, what were things we get available, but I knew that Meatloaf was going to be on, so I'm sitting there waiting for Meatloaf to come on. And I know my mother was there, but I assume my dad's there as well. And he breaks into Paradise by the Dashboard Light with Carla DeVito.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, shit, I hope they're not listening, to the lyrics and understanding about what exactly is going on. I'm thinking this is going okay. I don't want to look round because it's going to draw attention to what I'm watching. And I'm thinking of getting away with it until Meatloaf sticks his tongue in Carla's mouth and then starts fondling her tits. At which point I'm thinking, I'm not fucking getting away with this. And I think, what? And I don't know how it got, and I know it got to the end and she didn't switch it off. But I think the end of it was, we will not, or certainly you will not be watching that filth again. And it was a while before it was allowed to stay up to watch anymore. Because
can you imagine what that was like with that performance happening? I mean, literally 5 yards away from me, and it hadn't been like that during rehearsals.
Well, I was wondering about that,
It certainly was like that when they performed it live. I mean, we couldn't believe it. It was amazing, actually, the whole Meatloaf thing, because we had a video sent to us for Bat Out of Hell. by the record company at the time. I think it was probably CBS Columbia, anyway, Sony. And it was that very famous video of on the motorbikes, the graveyard, the dry ice, And when we saw it, I mean, we got that video weeks before the album actually came out here. But the producer of the program, Mike Appleton, and myself, we just thought this video is incredible. In those days, there still weren't that many videos. So to get something that really represented the track the way that video did was really quite special. And we put it out on the show. And of course, the demand was unbelievable. It just triggered everything really for Meatloaf. And he came over, did that performance on Whistle Test. He performed at the Hammersmith Odeon. I introduced him on stage that night. And the thing about that performance, wasn't it, was they just put everything into it. Yeah. It was like it was all happening right in front of you.
Yeah, apart from penetration, that was the only thing that wasn't involved. But certainly from the angle I was watching anyway, maybe you did better angle,
Is it fair to say that scarred you for life, Brian? Then?
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. One of the things that right away when you agreed to come on, Bob, that comes straight back into my head there.
Yeah.
My mum, certainly the eyes burning into the back of my head, thinking, what's my... Because, I mean, I was brought up as a Catholic, so this sort of stuff was not allowed, There was no sex in Catholicism, never mind.
No, quite.
Live on television, So it was one of the very few moments that I wanted the earth to open up and me to disappear into rather than turn around and say, good night or whatever else it was,
Yeah.
But I love to be able to. I love the fact that I was there to watch that live because for me it was you just mentioned it was.
Well, it looks incredible even now, doesn't it?
Well, particularly because I know they rehearse, but you don't know what they're going to do, and I don't know if they decided they were going to do that, but it was outstanding. Yeah. Everybody in school, the next day at school was talking about it, and I was delighted that I was able to participate in the conversation, unlike many conversations, as I said before, because I had to be in bed early.
Yeah. And it's amazing that, I suppose Whistle Test was the sort of only program like that of its kind on TV at the time. It was Top of the Pops was the singles show, and there was Whistle Test, which was the album show. And until MTV and multi-channels, really, Whistle Test and Top of the Pops were the only two places on the BBC that you could see music. So it became a sort of concentration point. You say there about talking to your friends at school in the playground the following day. And that's what happened with Whistle Test. People used to then meet up at the pub the following evening or that weekend to talk about the bands they'd seen on the show and to bring in their new albums of, I don't know, whoever it would have been, Pink Floyd or Can or Kraftwerk or someone, and the program, therefore, it was a catalyst, wasn't it, for people all over the country.
But don't you think that still rings true in a way, Bob? Because, I talk to people now, and I mentioned that I was chatting to tonight, and people in their late 20s, early 30s who probably might have a good reason not to know who you are, no disrespect, but they'll say, oh, yeah, Bob Harris, Old Grey Whistle Test. And I think that's because there is nothing like that now, and there hasn't been for a long time. And I wonder where people get their music from and where they get that, where they scratch that itch that everyone did in the 70s and 80s.
I think with, one of the things about Whistle Test that's given it this longevity is the look of the program. And the look of the program came about completely by accident, really. The way the show started, it was just so great the way that it kind of evolved. It was very organic, the arrival of the Old Grey Whistle Test onto the screen, because it was part of a strip of programs called Late Night Lineup in the late 60s, early 70s. So there was a cinema edition, a theatre edition, art. There wasn't a music edition. And Mike Appleton persuaded the BBC to let him do a program called Colour Me Pop originally, which evolved into a short-running show called Disco 2, which then evolved into the Old Grey Whistle Test. Now, David Attenborough was the co-station controller of BBC Two at the time, with another guy called Rowan Ayres. And between the two of them, they sort of let everybody loose, if you know what I mean. They didn't really completely understand what it was that Whistle Test was doing, but they just let us get on with it. The quid pro quo was that we didn't really have any budget to speak of. The program didn't have any money, so we couldn't dress the studio other than pulling a few lights down, putting some coloured gauze over the front of the lights. Mike got commissioned a round sign with the Star Kicker on it, and that was basically it. That was the studio set. So when you see those old films nowadays of the performances on the show, the look is so distinctive because the walls are black, there's wires showing, there's, you know, there's no dressing on the studio at all, but it's given it that look and that distinctive mark that seems to have carried it through the years. It's quite amazing, actually.
Did you know that when that happened, when that first began? Did you think to yourself, this is going to be iconic? I guess you didn't.
No, we had absolutely no idea. I mean, you know, we were literally doing the show from show to show. I mean, and the interesting thing is also now, when you think about it, certainly in the first 3 series that I did, we were on air 42 weeks of the year. So we were there every week, live. So when you are the only one and there are only 3 channels to choose from anyway, you know, eventually everybody gets to see it. And then in the summer, when we had a break, we used to go over to America and do all the filming over there, which was one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. Actually, I loved it, going to the States. And then that gave us the chance to bring back with us film and interviews and everything else with, you know, breakthrough stars in the States that people hadn't seen in this country yet. And I was reading through some of the old scripts a little while ago because we were transferring some material to go up on my site. And I realized literally that I was kind of reading through the history of album music in real time, because I was talking about this new band that were just about to put out their first album. Their name was the Eagles, and I talked about the background to the group, the fact that they'd worked with Linda Ronstadt, that the Dillards, you know, all of that stuff. Steely Dan, Little Feat, the Doobie Brothers, Carly Simon. I mean, all of these artists had their start with us on Whistle Test. And reading back through those old scripts now, it's amazing to realize that we were discovering all this new music at the time.
Can I ask you about football, Bob?
Yes, please.
Bobby Charlton.
Well, I mean, so I was 11 when the Munich air crash happened. And when I talk to sort of, you know, people nowadays about the impact of that moment, a lot of people find it hard to understand that it was a national tragedy. It wasn't just about United. It was about this group of young players, a lot of whom were representing England by then, that were literally sort of cut down in their prime. It was a tragedy. I remember even now, I mean, I know we see them on MUTV, but the film clips of the plane wreckage in the snow, that was a newsreel at the time, and I was absolutely devastated by what had happened to the United team. Well, out of those ashes, if you like, came this young lad called Bobby Charlton, and somehow for me, he encapsulated the spirit of United going forward. He was such a wonderful player that I became a massive fan of Bobby's. Right through, you know, perhaps my favourite moments with Bobby were the 1966 World Cup, particularly the semi-final, you know, when he got those 2 goals. But he had everything, left foot, right foot, probably didn't head particularly well. He wasn't a great header, was he? But other than that, he was a brilliant creator and scored spectacular goals. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Bobby Charlton's.
Was that the Bobby Charlton and then Manchester United, or was it Manchester United and then Bobby Charlton?
It was the two together. It was me discovering United and the Busby Babes and the whole spirit of that team at the time, and then realising that Bobby was one of the people that was going to take this team forward. So it was absolutely side by side. And then as I've grown older, my kids grew up, my son Ben is 40. And so when you were playing for United, he was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old.
Oh, thanks.
My younger son.
Is that all?
Miles and Dylan. Miles was born in 92 and Dylan was born in 95. And as they got older, like when United won the treble in 99, so Miles would have been 7, Dylan would have been 5. And for the next 10, 15 years, all they experienced was United challenging for the title. That it was just normal. That's what happened. It was the natural order of things. When both of them are now completely confused, as I am myself, someone must say, with the with the problems that the team are having at the moment, it doesn't compute to them at all because United always meant success.
I wonder whether, Bob, you grew up in Northampton, didn't you? I think, and were you one of few that was a United fan after Munich, or did it sweep across your age group?
I think a lot of us loved United at that time. Football was tribal within the fan groups that went to the matches, but it wasn't so much so. I don't think with as I was at the time, more of a casual spectator. I did begin then to go regularly to the county ground to see Northampton Town play. My dad was a very good friend with Dave Bowen, who was the manager who took them up from Division 4 to Division 1 in successive seasons, and then more or less back down in at the same speed. But I remember George Best coming to the county ground and getting, 18 goals in the first half. And and that was a split loyalty thing, I must say, because, if you like Northampton, and I will put it this way around, actually, Northampton are my second team, and I always want them to do well. It's the first result I look for outside of United's. So it was quite a pull with United coming and hammering Northampton on the day.
8-2, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Or fourth round, I think.
Yeah.
We can't talk about this without asking you, what do you make of the current situation at United? Is it, are you as frustrated as a lot of United fans are, or do you see
it's been, over the last 2 or 3 years, I think, in fact, my son Miles summed it up very well. It's the hope that kills you. Because what seems to happen is that United seem to go, everything seems to stabilise and then go forward 2 or 3 steps. And then something cataclysmic happens and sends you back 4 steps. And then it starts that process. It happened with Ollie. When, 29 away games unbeaten is some record, But once it started unravelling for Ollie, it unravelled at such a ridiculous speed. And it's been the pattern, it seems to me, over the last 3 or 4 years. And what I think so many of us have come to the conclusion about is that you can't really trust this group of players. I don't know what it is. I think they lack leadership. I know a lot of people say this, but that's what it looks like to me. Honestly, Brian, if you could time travel and get in the middle of this team and, knock him into shape a little bit, I think that would be extremely helpful. Could you actually do that?
I'm just thinking, Bob, we're talking about modern day United, but you were saying how you followed United since, late 50s. Have you got a favourite era that you of following the club, or a certain period of time that was your era,
Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 really. That time in the late 80s, early 90s, when you were so integral to the team, Brian, and you could sense as a supporter that things were beginning to kind of bed in now, that there was a structure that was emerging. You know, the back triangle in particular, you know, Schmeichel with Steve Bruce, Pallister, you know, Dennis Irwin was always such a fantastic player. You got yourself and Paul Ince and Mark Hughes. This was a team that was prepared to fight for the right to win the ball. And then when you added the spice of Cantona, and then with the young players coming through and bringing their energy in, all that, you know, that structure had now really bedded in. You had this fantastic blend, didn't you, of hard-edged defending, laced with fabulous attacking football. And that was the feeling that the youngsters took in with them then to 1999. The 98-99 side was just a magnificent side. It really was. I even prefer it to the 2008, you know, I was never keen to see Tevez in a United jersey, I must be honest. But that time when we won the European Champions League for the third time with Ronaldo, just that year, he was absolutely out of this world. So that was another good moment for the United team for me. But the two big ones were that time in the early 90s, as the team was really beginning to settle in. And then, you know, you had Cantona, who really, I think, was one of the most important signings United have ever made. And then that all growing into the treble-winning side in 99.
Yeah, just when it looked like United weren't going to do it, as you well know, there were so many near misses in the 80s and then 91, 92, as we all know.
Yeah.
And a lot of United fans would have been forgiven for thinking it was never going to happen. And then, yeah, as you say, that they sort of kicked into that next level that we all know. We all know what happened next.
Yeah. Brian, I mean, I say there that I think, you know, that Cantona was arguably one of the most, if not the most important United signing of modern times. Do you think I'm right about that?
I think it was something that came out of nowhere, really. It's a major surprise to everybody that was allowed to happen from both sides of Lancashire and Yorkshire. When he came, we knew we'd heard all about him and different things, but you couldn't have met a nicer person. He was very respectful. He worked hard. He trained hard. There was never any issue of a problem. Internally, you know, because there had been several incidents that happened with them on and off the pitch at previous clubs. I just think he felt, like it's been mentioned many times, that he felt at home. And Ferguson used to go on about trust, loyalty and respect, and I think he respected us.
Yeah.
And eventually he learned to trust, and then the loyalty became from winning and being successful as a team, you know. But he was wonderful player to be involved with, you know. A good person as well.
Yeah. Well, we always read about the fact that he would stay on after training and practice, and that he would encourage the young players to do the same. And then you've got David Beckham, for example, practicing his corners and free kicks over and over. You got Paul Scholes. I mean, Paul Scholes just loved playing football anyway, didn't he? But the youngsters were staying on. This is what I've read, you know, that then the youngsters were staying on after training to continue to practice with him because he was encouraging that. Is that true?
Yes, he did want to stay. He did do a bit extra bits after training, but I'm not sure that's because he didn't want to go home. No, he was a very positive influence on the whole club for the period of time he was there.
Yeah. And Sir Alex, I mean, you know, I know that he could be fearsome, or at least I'm sure he could. But in later years, as he began to mellow, and certainly, you know, when we got these little glimpses of him behind the scenes on MUTV, particularly there was a couple of programs he did with Dennis Law when you see his amazing sense of humor. And I don't know whether you know, but when I celebrated my 70th birthday, I did a sort of 70th birthday special on Radio 2. And, a lot of the musicians and people that I'd worked with through the years sent me messages to wish me happy birthday. But there was one message that my producer, Marc Simpson, said, I'm not going to tell you who this is. We'll leave it right to the end, and you just press the button when we come to it, and you'll hear this voice talking to you, So who could it be? The Queen, Bobby Charlton. I mean, I had no idea who it could possibly have been. So as it came to the moment, people were gathering in the control room next door, and my son Miles had his phone camera going. And so I said, I have no idea who this is, but let's press the button and find out. And I pressed the button, and I heard this voice go, Bob, Alec Ferguson. I thought for a split second, I thought it might be Rob Wright, because he does a very good impersonation of Sir Alex. But it was him. And Marc Simpson said that he'd done this unprompted. He'd heard that it was my 70th. He'd heard that there was going to be this little tribute to me on Radio 2, and he wanted to send me a message. It was wonderful. He said, I know you're a United fan. We've probably given you a lot of sleepless nights through the years, but all the very best. He said, you're 70 years old and going strong. And I thought, if Sir Alex Ferguson says I'm going strong, I'm going strong. And so when he came to his 80th, I got in touch with Jason and said, I would love to send him a message back. So I filmed it here in my studio and sent it to him via Jason. And I got this lovely email afterwards from Jason saying, the old man had a listen to it, absolutely loves it. Thanks very much, Bob. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is quite amazing.
But that's a true mark of the man, isn't it, Brian? I think.
Oh, I mean, Bob, I often say about one of the problems with this kind of transition period when David Moyes was chosen to be the manager, and David's very adept at managing and a decent human being, but Moyes had spent a lot of time studying the manager, read all his books, watched all the videos, listened to everything he said. But unless you're there next to him, you don't see the things that he doesn't show to the public. So that kind of thing you said about sense of humour, he had a cracking sense of humour, and the things that he used to do, and he did so many things to help people without wanting any accolades or any plaudits for it. He was out time and time again doing charity work. He would do those sort of things like you just said. Somebody might have mentioned, Bob Harris was a big Man United fan, and he's this and this, he's did this, and he manager loves his music, albeit from the 50s crooners and all that, 40s and 50s crooners, more like his stuff, And he was really good at doing that. Just a little kind of thing about talking about that. Me and him had a bit of a war over what tune they should come out to Old Trafford, because they used to come out to Simply the Best.
Yeah.
Tina Turner,
Yes.
And then when I mentioned to him that that's what Rangers came out to, he said, I'm not having that. Even though he played for Rangers, he had this thing in his... If you've watched the film, you've seen the film. You see the reasons why.
Yeah.
So as soon as they found out that was his tune that we were coming out to, it was... You can imagine the words that he used, to say that won't be happening again, So I was one of the I was interested in music, and he was interested in his music at his time, and he was going on about Matt Monro and all that. And I'm going, we can't even come out to Matt Monro. We're falling asleep, before we got on this.
Yes.
That kind of thing and all. I mean, this kind of thing. Eventually, he just got fed up with me saying, no. He says, you fucking choose. So I chose the Stone Roses. So that's the...
of course you did.
So and they're still playing it now, but he loved his music from that all the way through to a certain point, like we all did, we're interested in music. You might be different because you've been involved in it for a long time. You get to a certain point where you go, I remember all of that stuff from, say, 85 backwards for me for a certain way, till the point where I was interested in it, or even the point where I was interested it was before my time. Like, I loved a lot of stuff from the 60s, only because there was programs on the radio that played a lot of 60s stuff when I was a kid, or you'd access to records sometimes from relatives. But yeah, but people didn't see that, and I think that David fell upon some difficult moments because he didn't really understand, not copy him, because I don't think you can copy him, but he was trying to do a lot of things that Alex Ferguson would do, but he didn't understand exactly what he did.
The other thing that watching from a distance seemed completely at odds, really, was the fact that it wasn't just Sir Alex that left. David Gill left. The whole backroom staff left.
Yeah,
everybody's left, leaving this relative rookie to take the reins without the infrastructure behind him that had served United so well in previous years. I think from day one that was a big mistake, because to have held on to one or two of the people that Sir Alex had round him for that continuity, I think that would have been very important. But, that didn't really happen, did it?
Well, I mean, you can look at it, you can apply that to the things that you do, Bob. I mean, you could talk about, for example, the whistle test, and say that you develop a relationship and you're creating programs, and all of a sudden you say, "Oh, well, I'm finished now," and somebody new comes in with different ideas. You've had different situations where people come in different scenarios. You've been in radio, and they have a different view of what you're doing. And sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't. But the thing was, when the new people come in and they think, as we are all very wise as we've got older, we think that young people think they know the answers to everything, And often the answer to that isn't recognised until 10 years later on, when they realise that was the wrong answer.
Yes.
Anyway, just a little change of tack on that popped into my head. Who's got the better musical taste, Barack Obama or another president from the 70s that you might or might not have bumped into?
Jimmy Carter. Wow, that is a great question. That really is. Funny enough, I was thinking of...
Well, you may have bumped into Barack Obama as well, because you know everybody, but...
Yeah, well, because he makes his playlists up, doesn't he? He invited a lot of great musicians to the White House while he was there. Jimmy Carter was from Georgia, as we know, and he was massively supported during his presidential campaign, during his political campaign, by the Capricorn record label. The guy who ran Capricorn, Phil Walden, and Jimmy Carter were very good friends with each other. And the bands that signed up for Capricorn, so the Allman Brothers Band, Delaney and Bonnie, Marshall Tucker, that generation of Southern rock bands, they all had written into their contract that a certain amount of money would be siphoned off into Jimmy Carter's political campaign fund. So he always went down to Macon in the summer to attend the Capricorn record label picnic, which was the label's way of saying thank you to the industry, for the support they gave to Capricorn, because Capricorn was hugely successful at that time. And the summer of 76, we were there making a film about the Capricorn picnic, and Jimmy Carter came that day and only gave one interview that day. And it was the day that he had declared his intention to run for the presidency. And the one interview that he gave that day was to me, because he wanted to introduce himself to the British public via the BBC. And I discovered then that he was really, really into his music. He talked with great knowledge about people like Bob Dylan Simon & Garfunkel, the Southern rock bands that he loved. And there's a fantastic documentary, I bet you've seen it, Brian, called The Rock and Roll President, which charts his involvement with music and his idea that music is a fantastic force for change, that it can express, particularly in the late 60s, how tumultuous things were in America at that time. And music was playing a very important role in giving Black people a voice, giving alternative, an alternative view. Music was very important at that time. And he recognized that. And the documentary acknowledges his involvement, right the way through. I mean, just to wrap that up, he's still alive, at least. I think he's 97 years old, and he's absolutely lovely. He's still doing all the work that he can to help his local community, and he was a really genuinely lovely man.
When everybody know that because you've had such a successful career and you're now enjoying another great time in music, but you had a bit of you could have a sort of difficult time in the 80s where you went on to do some other different things and worked for various different local radio stations rather than national radio stations. At any point when you ended up doing those things, did you become disillusioned, or did you use it as just, well, I've still got a job and it's a great job to have? I mean, it's a bit like saying, you were playing for Manchester United and now, for example, you were working for Radio Oxford, I believe, so you got the Oxford United and you're ploughing down there in the third division. Did you ever get pissed off with it? Or?
No, there was 2 or 3 things about that time. I mean, it was so funny, but you are absolutely right, because the last national broadcast I did was introducing Blondie on stage at the Apollo Theatre in Glasgow on the night of the 31st of December 1979, so December 79 into January 1980 was the last national show I did. And the first national show I did back was my first regular show on Radio 2 on the 6th of January 1990. So pretty much to the day, the 80s passed me by. But at the time that I went on to Radio Oxford, I have to say that at that moment, I was really ready to and wanting to step out of the spotlight for a little while. I mean, I know you know this, and I know that you see it with footballers, that they become famous very, very quickly. There's no school that prepares you for that kind of fame. And it's great in lots of ways, but it's also can do your brain in. And particularly in the late 70s when, there was a new generation of music that hadn't taken kindly to the whistle test and we were getting a lot of criticism. And what had been really fun had now stopped being fun like that 7 years on, and I really just wanted to break. And so it was my choice to go back to local radio and just kind of rediscover my roots, really. At no point did I get any feeling that I wanted to leave radio. And because, if you be me in 1984, and I was on pretty much everybody's most uncool person of the year list. Ex-whistle test, I wasn't really working. It was tough, to get. So I did lots of odd, one-off programs here and there. I was traveling to Norwich to do Radio Broadland, to Swindon to do GWR, down to Bristol to do a show down there, Reading, Peterborough. I was traveling all over the place just to keep my hand in, because I just knew that if I let it go, once you step off that roundabout, it's almost impossible to get back on. So I just kept it going. I was fortunate also. I married an Anglo-Italian woman, and I was with Val. She was a cookery, BBC cookery expert, and she was Anglo-Italian. We used to spend a lot of time in the summers in Italy. So it wasn't like I was having a terrible time. But as I came towards the end of the 80s, I began to feel that I'd really like to get back onto national radio if I could. And I had under very sad circumstances, actually, but an amazingly lucky break. One of my favorite DJs of all time, Roger Scott, had become very ill with cancer. And Johnny Beerling, who was the controller of Radio 1 at the time, had a little house down in southeastern Spain. And he took Roger down there for a holiday and to record a long interview with him as a sort of legacy interview. Well, I was doing programs at the time for BFBS, the British Forces Broadcasting Service. And of course, they have a big transmitter in Gibraltar. So when Johnny was down in southern Spain, he was able to tune into BFBS and he heard my show. I was doing a weekly show and he absolutely loved it. I mean, he got back to London and called me up and said, do you want to come in? And he said to me, we're going to need a successor for Roger. And so he offered me, when Roger passed away, he offered me Roger's Sunday evening show. And that's how I got restarted. It was amazing, actually.
I never thought that, I love the White Shade of Pale. I think it's a fantastic tune and maybe one of the best tunes of all time. But I never thought that it would be relative to your safety.
I know. Well,
Local Harum.
Yeah, I know. 76. This was, the very famous night with the Sex Pistols. There's a documentary out now called Pistol, isn't there? That charts this moment very briefly. Is it
in that? I'm not saying that.
Yeah, it is a blink and you miss it. But no, a fight broke out at the Speakeasy between basically them and me. They came to attack me. I was with a friend of mine called George Nicholson, who was the engineer I was working with at Morgan Studios at the time. But we'd popped into the Speakeasy on our way home to, just have a drink. It's Rock and Roll Dive in Margaret Street in the West End. And the Sex Pistols were there. And we were just about to leave. And one of the guys in the entourage came over and took a massive great haymaker's swing at me. And it was amazing because just all hell broke loose.
He must have been quite tall because you're a tall man, aren't you?
He was taller than me. I remember him too because he was in a green boiler suit. And I got pulled around the other side of the bar and there was no escape. I got my back against a wall and I had these kids coming towards me with broken bottles and broken glasses. And a whole load of people got in between them and me. And they certainly saved me from serious damage, whether it's, they circled me and kept and in this amazing symbolic moment of meeting one generation to another. This was the Procol Harum Road Crew. Yeah. I'm forever indebted to the Procol Harum Road Crew.
You've got lots of very good friends in music. I was wondering that when you're reviewing albums of people you're close to, has anybody ever fallen out with you because they didn't agree with your public view of their records,
Well, again, that's a fantastic question. Actually, it really is, because there is a dilemma there in that there's, say, an artist that you've supported right from day one, and you're really connected to that artist. You're associated with that artist. And then suddenly they put out a record you don't like. Now, I can disguise this very easily by simply either A, not playing it at all, or picking off a track that would fit into a show and just playing that one track. So at least I've represented them. I mean, in the early days when I was doing Whistle Test in the early 70s, when I first started doing the show, I was probably, I would say, I was too outspoken about whether I liked this band who was appearing on the show or not. It was kind of fashionable for record critics to be critical in those days. Rolling Stone magazine, the big writers on Rolling Stone were getting as big as almost the rock stars they were writing about. And I think we all got a bit carried away with that. And gradually I began to realize that it just wasn't constructive to be critical of music that I was playing or go out of my way to make a statement about a record I didn't like. So much more, it's the other way around. When you listen to my programs with the music that I'm playing, I'm playing these tracks because I really like them. And I don't play music I don't like. It's simple as that. So it's very rare then that this dilemma kicks in. It's just occasionally when somebody that I'm close to will give me a new record, let's say, and I listen to it and I'm struggling to really find something on it that I like. Then it's difficult but that's on a personal level. That's between them and me, of me having to kind of explain sometimes why I'm not playing the record on the radio the way that I normally would do, But I think, having said that, if your friendship's strong and you're able to talk about an album constructively, you're not just dismissing it, you're sitting there and you're talking through it with that artist, then they will accept that you're not going to play absolutely everything they do, and let's move on to the next record and see how we go with that one.
Do you have that creative freedom, Bob? I mean, obviously you have a voice now that a lot of people don't. But I wonder whether if someone gives you a record now, are you able to say, no, I'm not having that? Or?
Yeah, I am. I work really closely with my partner on the country show is Marc, and we do work as a partnership. But that's in a defined, we've got our demarked areas. So Marc produces the show. He makes absolutely certain that we've got everything we need, that he's reached out to everybody to get all the new music that's being released that week so that we can sift through, or at least he can pass on to me exclusives and things like that we may or may not want to play. He always creates what's called an in-play list of tracks that he knows maybe are getting hot in America or things I might have missed. So he'll pass on to me over the weekend a list of, he always chooses the reissue of the week as well. But again, that's always something that we've agreed on between us. But other than that, he passes on a list of what he thinks are essential things. And then I cherry pick off that list and blend in with other things that I've got on my mind or oldies that I want to play or anniversary tracks. But the person with the pen in their hand, if you like, is me. And that's always been the case, actually, literally from the first program I ever did. Because when I started on Radio 1 in 1970, I started under the wing of John Peel. John was my mentor figure at that time. And he introduced me to his producer, Jeff Griffin. And when John went on holiday in the summer of 1970, Jeff asked me to sit in for John for a month while John was away. And he said, I'm going to let you bring all your music in. You'll choose the music. But he said, I'll show you how to build a program, which is the way it was described in those days. So he taught me about program building, about the flow that you can create, the contrasts that you can build up, the opening. I mean, I've always built programs on a wave shape. So you begin with something really bright and familiar. You've got 2 or 3 quite up-tempo things. Then you're beginning to get into the meat of the show. You can bring the tempo down slightly, have to match 2 records that are very similar. And so you're building this flow through. And I've always loved to do that. And it seemed that I'd established the principle of me doing that for my programs literally from day one with the BBC, and they've kind of let me do it ever since. So all the programs, perhaps with the exception of when I sit in on or sat in on drive time, so, but almost all the programs you've ever heard me do on the radio, I've been the one that's chosen the music.
I'm just thinking, because we had Marc Pugach on a couple of shows ago, and we were talking, Brian, about you becoming a pundit, which you never were. But I think maybe you being a late night host on Radio Luxembourg would have probably been more your thing, wouldn't it?
Well, I think for late night, I've certainly got the voice for it. I think you need to be the ability to send people to sleep. Not that I'm saying that you were sending people to sleep, Bob, when you were doing it, but I think I've got that sort of voice that, when I would be telling a story or deciding what record to play, that if that was a desire, I know that a lot of people listen to late night radio are not actually going to sleep, they want to stay awake, But yeah, I think that would be more interesting to me. I always wanted to play football, but love music, and I love listen to music, and I love listening to people who are passionate about music. And now you're very much Mr. Country, or is it still country and western? Is it just country? Is it Americana? What is it all encompassing?
It's country.
Because when I was growing up in North Lanarkshire, country and western was very popular, and there was a guy you may have come across who's hugely popular in the west of Scotland called Sid the Divine. Mm. Have you heard of him?
I have, yeah.
Right. Well, he was the one that all the people and roundabout thought he was fantastic, and this was a Scottish representative of Johnny Cash, I suppose. For me, it's not the easiest to listen to, and certainly put me off country and western. Why do you think that country has endured?
Well, I think it's summed up in the description of country music in the States, where particularly in Nashville, it's three chords and the truth. That's really what it is. So there's a simplicity about the music, and there's an honesty about the music. And I think, with Loretta Lynn passing, she was the epitome of that thing that the country has of being able to describe the lives of the people who listen to it. Country's always had this connection with its fans. It's probably evaporating a little bit these days, but certainly when you go back, say, to Loretta's time in the early and mid-60s in particular, she was writing the lives of the people that were buying her records, because she'd lived that life. She'd had a really difficult, challenging childhood. Her family had no money. She had kids when she was really young. She'd had to really battle to get to where she was. And when she did start making records, she'd drive them out herself with her husband, do massive great tours in the car, visiting radio stations all over the country to just go in and give the DJ her single and maybe play a couple of songs while she was there. She really put the work in, and she really experienced, what did she have? I think 4 kids by the time she was 18 or 19. I mean, really, no money. And a lot of the people who loved her music could relate to the fact that she'd been through, really difficult times herself. She was a flag bearer for women in music in the 60s as well. And I think in that way, or in those ways, she epitomized what country music at its best is all about, reflecting in the lives of the people that listen to it, having respect for those people. I mean, I was at a Willie Nelson concert in 1999, and at the end of the show, I was just expecting everybody to get up and leave. Well, everybody got up, but nobody left. They all formed this massive great queue around the venue, waiting for Willie to come back out, which he did, and stood in front of the stage and signed everything anybody wanted him to sign. Photographs. He was there for way over an hour, maybe up to an hour and a half, just saying hello to all the fans of his that were there in that audience that night. I'd never seen that before. Not in rock. Anyway, the only other time I saw it actually was when Vivian Richards, the cricketer, did that for a group of schoolboys that was stuck outside of a marquee that he was in and getting soaked in the rain. And he invited them all in, 150, 200 of them, and sat talking to them for a couple of hours and just made their lives, no doubt. But I'd never seen rock artists do that the way that Willie Nelson did. And that, to me, demonstrated the connection, saw it right in front of my eyes, of Willie Nelson to his fans and vice versa. And that's the strength that country music has got.
Was it, tell me, when was she a beautician before she became a star?
Yeah, I mean,
and but did she not go back every year or so and re-qualify? because she was never sure when it was going to end.
Yes, and
Which I thought that was a magical story.
Yes.
Say, well, I'm still in touch with reality. I've got all this, but it could finish tomorrow, and I might need something to do to earn some money. So therefore, I'll make sure that I'm qualified as a beautician, I think it was. So.
Well, there's a university in Nashville, Belmont University, and a lot of the emerging stars are encouraged to take a course at Belmont. It's specifically, as a university, it's specifically geared to the music industry. So you can go to Belmont for a year, and Belmont University will take you through the various aspects of the music industry, the interface you're likely to come up against when you start becoming a star, let's say. It's the closest you can get to schooling as to what to expect. And they organised with the record labels in Nashville for some of the students from Belmont to go into the label as on a short sort of a week or sort of intern basis.
Yeah.
And country music is very, very good at doing this, about giving its performers some kind of context within which to build their work, if you like. It's the other thing about country is that, and again, this sounds almost corny, and it is a sweeping generalization, I know this, but country music people are really very nice. They really are. There's so few people in country that, when they get to a studio, they're prepared. When you come to interview them, they're looking to give you something in the interview. They're not going to sit back trying to be cool. They are really going to engage with where it is that you're coming from. They come in to play live for you. They're absolutely ready. They've got, all the equipment set up. They've got the songs ready. They're rehearsed. They know exactly what they're doing. And again, coming from the rather more sort of raucously scattered world of rock, this was a revelation to me to see that country music people were so willing to be, to reach out to their fans and be accommodating to the media that was supporting them. And it's really, it's great stuff.
I get the feeling you're not a country music fan, Brian.
No, it's not. No, I've got a very Catholic taste in music. And particularly, and I know that's a good friend of yours again, Bob, I loved Robert Plant and Alison Krauss. That album, the first album they came out, I thought it was a brilliant crossover of rock and country that seemed to work out really well. And it was interesting to see that both of you were ecstatic about getting awards at the Country Music Awards ceremony. And it's like going all the way back to when this all started, but so you go all the way back. You can go all the way back and back and back. So could it start off? I mean, I worked a wonderful program a number of years ago called Bring It All Back Home, where it was Irish and Scottish and music that was taken then to America and then transported about America and all different parts of America as people spread around America. That became potentially influenced by the blues, influenced by country, influenced by jazz, and then becomes all different. And then it comes back with Elvis Presley and Bill Haley and all that kind of thing. And then the Beatles get involved in all that in the 60s.
Yeah.
And I'm also quite interested in how music travels. It's travelled from certainly Europe, a lot to do with Ireland and Scotland and England to the States, and then it's come back in different generations of stuff. So I love all sorts of stuff. I'm only going to kind of saying about country because 77, 78, that's when punk became an explosion of stuff, and that was the thing that was the biggest influence because that was what everybody always wanted to listen to. I mean, people were wandering around school with the Stranglers album, Artist in the VG, so they're wandering about with Tonic for the Troops, with Boomtown Rats, that sort of thing, 77, 78. So that became the thing that was all there, and you wanted to be part of of that kind of thing. And a lot of that stuff, I think, stands well in time with regards to what it was. I mean, there's this kind of thing that, none of them could play music, none of them could play, but quite clearly they could play, because a load of them are still got careers in music, So say, the Sex Pistols couldn't play. Well, Matlock could play. Jones could play, the Clash they could all play, played in a different way to maybe the Pink Floyd were doing, or the Allman Brothers, or David Bowie, for example, but they had enough musical ability to be able to do something. So I'm interested in all sorts of stuff. I just like that idea about, and I love to hear you saying about, so for me, the way that I kind of like to live my life is it's been nice and all encompassing, that to hear that your experience of country is all about trying to please and be nice and kind is must be wonderful for you to be involved in all the time,
Yeah, I mean, there's a dilemma occasionally about the politics, because we are talking about the southern states, and we are talking about what previously had principally been white music. But that's changing really quite fast now. And country music is embracing people from right across the spectrum. There's an amazingly enriching group of Black country music artists that have come into the music in the last sort of literally 3 or 4 years. Jimmy Allen, Brittany Spencer, Mickey Guyton, Breland. These artists, they are very special. They're bringing in to country flavors of music from outside of country, because they too love this whole thing of the truth of country. So, but they're bringing in their own flavors, and it's working brilliantly. I mean, I think, I was saying now, there's an artist, Breland, Breland. Breland is one of the most recent Black music artists that's come into country. He's fantastic. He really is. I think we're going to be co-presenting Country to Country, the C2C festival, together on stage next March. He's going to be huge, I think, and symbolically that's very important. Jimmy Allen, the same, Mickey Guyton, Brittany Spencer. I think if you had to listen to some of those artists, Brian, I think you'll enjoy the music that they're making. It's not pure country, but it brings into country flavors of other music, which is incredibly attractive.
Is Rex Bob Ludstein about you?
Oh, God, I wish it was. It was Marc Gemino. That's on an album called Caught in the Act of Being Ourselves. And actually, it was sort of Roger Scott's theme about this. It's about this Southern DJ, isn't it, who plays all sorts of different music back to back. And of course, the radio station, the big companies have now taken over this radio station. It's part of a chain, and they want the station to conform to the playlists that are made up for all the other stations across America. Except there's this guy on the station called Rex Bob Ludstein, who is incredibly popular, but plays whatever he likes. But I'm afraid your drive time jock is going to have to go. And it's the story of him being forcibly, removed from the station.
I just thought you because you picked it on Desert Island Disc, didn't you? So I just thought you might wanted to be him.
Oh, wanted to be him? Yes. And I suppose in a way, I've done my best to be him, really.
Because I love a little bit in it when he says that he plays Madonna after playing George Jones, which is, you can't really get much further apart, can you?
That's right. Well, in the overnight show that I used to do in the 90s, and then the weekend show that I used to do on Radio 2, both of those programs were really, really eclectic. I used to play, literally absolutely everything. And it is interesting because, you say about the lovely partnership of Robert with Alison Krauss. And Robert first heard Alison on my weekend show. Saturday evening, he was driving back from dropping his son off after tennis. He was driving through the countryside in Worcestershire. It was about 11 o'clock in the evening. Right, it's still not quite dark yet. I mean, it was right mid-June. And I put an Alison Krauss track on. I think it was Stay. And Robert was transfixed by it. He pulled the car over and turned the car radio up and stepped out, so the speakers in the door were pumping out the music. And he was standing under the stars saying and he said to me later that Alison's voice sounded like it had come from another planet. That's how he described it. So the very first time he heard Alison was that moment. The first time Alison had heard Robert was her older brother was a massive Led Zeppelin fan in the 70s. So she'd kind of, as a young girl, she'd sort of grown up with Led Zeppelin. I know her background was bluegrass, but she'd had Led Zeppelin as part of her life growing up. So actually, when Robert tentatively approached, it was T-Bone Burnett who produced them, and T-Bone approached Alison, and then the two of them met, and about probably 3 or 4 weeks later, I was in Nashville doing a series of sessions there, and Alison came into the studio. She's the next one to do a session with me, and the first thing she said was, "Your friend Robert," she speaks like this. She said, "Your friend Robert has asked me to send you his love." And I said, "What are you working with?" She said, "Yeah, shh." She was shh. I said, it was. So that's when I knew that the partnership between them had started.
And one final question, or one final thing for me is, how proud are you to have inspired the dress sense of Mumford and Sons?
I honestly, Brian, I tell my kids I was a fashion icon. Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, well, I'll own it.
But we've got a huge mailbag of questions to ask you. But before we do, I wonder whether there's anything you wanted to ask Brian. I mean, not wanting to put you on the spot, but now's your chance to talk to her.
Well, it's not almost so much asking, it's reflecting along with, because, that United team, and as you began to see it, I alluded to this at the beginning of the conversation, but, you can see by 1990, even, I say this with the benefit of hindsight, but a team is beginning to come together, and it has this strength about it, physically. And then just invisibly to us at this moment, but in a year or two's time, you've got this incredible crop of youngsters coming through in a way that surely will never happen again. And then one by one, obviously Ryan Giggs was the first, but one by one, you see them coming into the team. And that moment, Brian, to be in the middle of all of that, with Eric Cantona, so often the conductor of the orchestra, must have been, all of you must have been feeling that you were part of something very special that was building there.
Well, the reason I came to United was because Alex Ferguson told me that he wanted to rebuild a club, not build a team. He wanted to rebuild a club, and I believed what he was saying. Now, all the way through that process of building, and there was lots of downs as well as some ups, that you could see little things happening, and bit by bit, and through that times there was also fortune, luck, whatever you want to call it, involved, which you have to do to win some games and win cups. But we felt that there was, as you said, there was a momentum building. And sometimes through that you have to have adversity. And I think the adversity for us was almost getting to win the last old English First Division, which Leeds eventually won. And I think we felt that things had conspired against us because we'd been successful in other competitions. And we had to end up playing 4 games in 8 days, which is preposterous, and that I'm not saying that because, I mean, at the end of the best team, overall the best team wins the league, so Leeds won the league. But for us, that we were dispirited and upset about the whole kind of situation because we knew we'd got that close. However, the thing that gave us a huge fill-up and a huge boost for the first time, this is not as public as the previous one is that Alan Hansen said on Match of the Day that that's the best chance that Man United will ever get. They'll never get that close again. They're done. Meaning we're done, right? That was us. We're done. And certainly from my point of view, I'm not having that. Not having it. And, that. Right, and that gave us we couldn't wait to get back. We've got to have our holidays but we couldn't wait to get back. And that moment we got back, even though the season didn't start that great, we felt that there was something coming. And then you just need a little change, a little boost, a catalyst. And I suppose Eric was a catalyst. And then those groups of players, because Ferguson and Knox, when they first came in, first thing they did was to reinvigorate the youth system, which was in a mess, really. I mean, Manchester United had 2 scouts for the whole of Lancashire. 2 scouts for all of Lancashire. The City were getting all the players, and Fergie was pissed off about why City getting all these players. Yeah, who eventually turned out to be the team that gave us a gubbin 5-1 at Main Roads. Well, that's where all of those players were when they first came. And he bit by bit they chipped away at that, and eventually started to see these things happening. And I was towards the end of that kind of thing. I'd been playing different, training with the reserves, playing the reserves because I wasn't first choice, and I was right in the heart of seeing what these kids were going to be like. And you could see, I'm going to have to be personally just to stay on the bench, for example. It's going to have to work my arse off just to stay ahead of some of these, and eventually you're going to lose a battle because that's what mortality does. But that was all part of some kind of big plan that you had. At the end of it, everything that was achieved and the whole body of work is incredible. When he's saying to me, I'm going to build a football club, he built a football club and more. And I suppose that's why we're all disappointed and disillusioned, because it's only 10 years ago and it seems to be spiraling bit by bit.
Montclair's mailbag. Montclair's mailbag. Montclair's mailbag.
The Royal Mail might be on strike every other day, but McClare's mailbag always gets through. So over to Matthew with your questions.
Okay, we have got a full mailbag for you, Bob. We'll motor through it. From Steve Ockleshaw, he says, does Bob think Led Zeppelin was really the sum of its 4 parts, or would Jimmy Page have made it with any other musicians?
That's another really good question, and one that's as good as impossible to answer, because they were eventually, that's what they were. They were this powerhouse. 4 people who put absolutely the best out of each other every second. It was quite incredible, actually. And you could see it on stage. You could really see the camaraderie and the way that they were, pumping each other up. And Jimmy did, Jimmy was the catalyst originally. He had this band, he was in this band called the Yardbirds. And who would ever think also that, one band would produce 3 of the great guitarists of all time, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, and Eric Clapton. They were all in the Yardbirds. So Jimmy took the Yardbirds on, built most of Led Zeppelin around him, and then Robert was the last piece of the jigsaw. And honestly, I saw them a lot through the 70s and spent a lot of time with them all. And they were carrying everything before them, particularly in America. They were by far the biggest band of the decade. It was incredible to see what was happening around them and just how huge it actually got. I mean, even bigger at that point than the Stones, say, as a touring band. They were a force, and I genuinely do think that individually they were all great, and Jimmy would have been brilliant in any band he played in. But the 4 of them, however good they were, in the band was still more, the sum of the parts was more than the individual members.
Okay. He's always snuck in a supplementary question. He says, what's the most treasured signed piece of memorabilia you have? Music or football related?
It's just to my left here on the wall. It's John Lennon's autograph.
Well, there's a story in itself. You can't leave us hanging like that.
I met him in New York, and he drew that little sheep on it as well, you can see. He put "To Bob with Love, John Lennon," and then that sort of little nose and glasses thing of himself. And it was 1975. It was when I met up with him to record the interview for Whistle Test in New York. So that. Oh, and I've got a champagne cork in the studio here from a bottle that was popped open by Muddy Waters. That's pretty good as well.
You can't beat that, can you? Right, I'm thinking,
I'm looking for something here. Yeah.
I mean, anything you want to say about John Lennon? Obviously, he's one of the many people that I'm sure a lot of people ask you about.
Yes, it was. I mean, it really was incredible to meet him. It wasn't just that I was meeting a hero, and that was very true. I mean, but the fact that when we met, everything seemed to fall away, and we just instantly got on really well. It was just two guys who met up, who just happened to just click. So we spent a couple of days with John in New York, and it was at the time that they just discovered that Yoko was pregnant with Sean, and John was so happy and in very sort of celebratory mood. And it was with that atmosphere that we sat down and chatted. And a lot of people have said that they think it's one of the best interviews that he gave in the 70s for that reason, because he's so relaxed and so open. And it's funny because over the years, I've felt very connected in a way with the Lennons, because Cynthia was a big, really close friend. And I wrote the last section of my autobiography, the updated section at Cynthia's house in Mallorca. My friend Colin Hall is the custodian of Mendips, John's childhood home in Liverpool. So, I felt very connected to John Lennon all the way through. And that moment of meeting him and spending time with him in New York, it's one of the absolute highlights of my life, I have to say.
Absolutely. Paul Lawrence asks, did you ever meet any unexpected fans from the music business in your long career? Dolly Parton being a massive Crew Alexandra fan, for example?
Oh, gosh. Yes. Oh, God. Charles Eston from the television series Nashville. Big Spurs fan. Yes. I'm trying to think who else, because there have been a couple of other people. I mean, one of the things about the overlap between sport and music can happen in lots of different ways. And when Rod Stewart was living out in LA in the late 70s, he got together a team of expats, and they created a little league playing some of the local soccer teams, as was then. There wasn't an MLS, and it was all very kind of, informal. But there was a structure to the league, and Rod, as we know, Rod used to love playing football. He used to kick those footballs out into the crowd when he was doing his gigs and stuff. And on the cricket side, people like Eric Clapton, Pink Floyd, loved their cricket. So, yes, if I think of any more, I'll let you know.
It makes me think, though, because you were at a time in music when it wasn't fashionable to be a football fan. I mean, now, well, since probably the 90s to now, if you're in the music industry, everyone says, oh, I'm a football fan, blah, blah, blah. But not many people really know that you were a football fan, as you've spoken about tonight, and you told us about your stories of growing up following United. I mean, not many people really know that. They don't put two and two together. It's a funny era, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. Of course, the other big fan is Robert Plant, Wolves. Huge, of course. But yes, you're right. And it's something that, I've never necessarily, it's neither that I've hidden it or that I've trumpeted it, particularly in that era, that treble winning team of the late 90s and early 2000s, I have a friend who lives in Harrogate, a friend of mine called Roy Webber, and Roy used to get tickets he was in a sort of group of four, and they used to get 2 tickets. They used to sort of, they used to do a roster between them, and every now and again, a couple of tickets would come up free, and I'd take Miles up, and we'd go to Old Trafford and see a home game. I think of all of the games that I saw at that moment, the one that was the most disappointing was the loss to Dortmund in the semi-final the year before we won the treble. Yeah. Because Dortmund weren't that good. And for some reason, we just didn't play well that night. I remember seeing Eric striding off the pitch, straight down the tunnel. And even then, I sort of had the feeling that he was just so, I don't know, I wasn't at all surprised when he retired at the end of that season. But that Dortmund game, it was really frustrating to be there watching that one. Yeah.
Well, there is another question on that coming up later, but this one's from Raymond in Glasgow, and he asks, what would be your chosen subject on Mastermind?
Oh, I've done it. And my subject was the DJ Alan Freed, who was the American DJ that invented the phrase rock and roll, or at least is credited as having done so. And he was in the early 50s in particular. He was a huge champion of black music on white radio. There wasn't really anybody like him playing black R&B records. And then as we got into, doo-wop, and then Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Fats Domino and all these people were getting onto white radio stations via Alan Freed. And he got absolutely hounded in the end by the implication of payola in those days. The thing about playing records on the radio then was that the B-side would generate as much royalty as the A-side. If the A-side got played, the B-side would earn as much money from that play. So a lot of people used to gratuitously put their name to B-sides of singles to just earn a little bit of extra money. Elvis did it in the very, very early days. So Alan Freed did it. And when they retrospectively went back over the law of this, because then it became outlawed, it became known as payola. They retrospectively went back over Alan Freed's career and said, you accepted payola. And they were out to get him. He was the white guy playing black music, and he was very much against the establishment in America at the time. And, he used to take these big R&B shows out on the road, multi-artist R&B shows. He was amazing. So anyway, he was my subject, my specialist subject on Celebrity Mastermind. And it all didn't end well for him because he got hounded out of the industry and eventually finished up, 65. I think he passed away. He was alcoholic and, hadn't been on radio for years. And it was really a tragic story. And yet of all the people involved in music at the time, he actually was the most principled, actually, because he was prepared to admit that this is what he'd done. Yeah, I did. I wrote, put my name on a few B-sides because there was no rule at the time to tell me I couldn't. So when they backdated the rule to include him, he started fighting it, and quite rightly too. And it broke him effectively. But anyway, he was my specialist.
And how did you get
on Mastermind? Oh, well, on my specialist subject, I did quite well. I got 12. But then, not that I'm trying to make excuses here, but John Humphreys engaged me in conversation when I sat back down for the second round. And I was really getting into the conversation. I wasn't preparing myself for the bullet rat-a-tat speed of the questions when they came at me at the start of the second round. And by the time I got my brain around the fact that, oh my God, what did you do? I got 4. So I got 16 in total, which occasionally nowadays would have stood me in quite good stead. But on the night, I was last. I was 4-4.
Have we had this question to you, Brian, before about your specialist subject if you were on Mastermind? I'm sure we must have done.
Yeah, probably, but I'd have to do some studying, so that's not...
not the Clash or Pogues or...
No, I'd have to do... I wouldn't even do it myself as a specialist subject.
No, you'd leave that to me, wouldn't you? Here's one for you, Bob. Brian E. from Cheshire asks, I've read 2 different versions of the creation of the first issue of Time Out magazine. Was it produced on Tony Elliott's mum's kitchen table or yours and Sue's kitchen table?
Mine and Sue's kitchen table. At number 77 Platts Lane in London. Yeah, and it was done with Letraset, and we got the type stuff done at a local printers in strips that we glued to the pages, and then did the Letraset thing for the headlines across the top. It was all absolutely DIY. And the first edition was a fold-up that you could open up as a poster and put it on your wall. Or you could fold it down and take it with you and put it in your pocket.
That's all the best publications were in those days. Yeah. Letraset on the kitchen table. Our old friend Cumbrian Dave is back again, so here he is.
What is your favourite live studio performance on the old grey whistle test? And what's your most memorable Manchester United game?
Oh, wow. That's a wow. Okay, so performance. What I'm going to say is it's not necessarily my favourite, because when you get into the concert shows, for example, and you've got people like Bonnie Raitt and Jackson Browne and stuff, but the moment that we knew suddenly that the programme had a real audience out there and was becoming genuinely influential was when Focus appeared on the show. And they were on Polydor, and the pressing Polydor, the demand for their records immediately after they appeared on the program was ridiculous. They had Hocus Pocus out as a single and Sylvia, and 2 albums out, and all of them went straight into the charts. And Polydor had to devote the whole of their pressing plants here and in Germany for about 10 days to meet the demand. And that's when suddenly we began to realize, people are actually watching the show. There's quite a lot of people out there that are actually watching the show. Yeah, so I'd say it's not necessarily my favorite, but it's certainly the kind of breakthrough performance. That's when we knew that the program was beginning to carry some weight.
Okay, and your favorite United game?
Well, oh gosh. I mean, okay, so the 3-2 against Juventus, after being 2-0 down, after about 12 minutes, to pull that back to 3-2, I think that's the best European performance ever. It's got to be, because that Juventus side was huge. It was a brilliant side. And to go 2 down and to recover the way that United did that night and propelled themselves to the final was really, really something. So I would say, the 3-2 against Juventus.
Yeah, I don't think you'll get many people disagreeing with that. Cumbrian Dave's a good regular, so he's offered a couple of other questions. I'll ask you, I'm sure you won't mind. He says, what was Marc Bolan like as a character, and do you think T-Rex get the credit they deserve?
Oh, Marc was fabulous. He was absolutely destined to be a star. I mean, he was just determined right from day one, I'm going to be a star. I met him at John Peel's house in Fulham. The first time I met Marc was also the first time I met John, because I was doing an interview with John for a magazine at the time. And Marc was there, sitting on the floor. It was perfect. I mean, Persian rug, him with his corkscrew hair, playing an acoustic guitar, and we became really good friends. Sue and my wife Sue and his wife June and Marc, the 4 of us. And that friendship then grew into me comparing the first T-Rex tour, the big one in 71, when Ride a White Swan had already been number 1, Jeepster, Hot Love, Get It On, that incredible run of singles that Marc put out at that time. And to answer then the second part of the question, those records are among the best you can find. Get It On is an absolute classic. And I think maybe he is getting more recognition now than, we still hear about Marc Bolan. We still hear his music on TV from time to time. His music is the soundtrack to a lot of commercials, isn't it, on TV? And he would love that. So, I think I would have kind of agreed maybe at some points that Marc wasn't credited, in the way that he should have been, because also, obviously, as we know, he was the architect almost of glam rock. I mean, Marc used to love when he wrote stuff to me, a little note or something, he'd always stick lots of sticky stars all over it, white and gold and silver stars. And he used to put stars on his cheeks when he first started doing whistle test and stuff like that, and wear eye makeup. And so, you know, he was determined. He was determined to break through, and of course he did. And he made some great records at that time.
Yeah. You a T-Rex fan, Chucky?
Yes. Yeah. No, it was funny just saying that, Bob. I was listening to Radio X the other day, and Johnny Vaughan, I don't know if you know him or not, or you think he's any good or not, but he was going on about T-Rex in a kind of humorous kind of way, saying, "Oh, can you imagine a band like that now? You know, you bring out Ride the White Swan, right? Oh, that's brilliant, and then the week after, almost, you bring out Jeepstar, and then a couple of weeks later, you bring out Get It On. You know, you'd be the biggest thing that's ever, you know." And then Solid Gold, and he just went through, and I kind of laugh, him and his producer, his mate, you know, went through 8 or 9 songs that just came out, and they were all massive hits. And great songs that stood the test of time.
Yeah, I mean, even after the real surge had gone by, you know, something like "I Love to Boogie." "I Love to Boogie" is just brilliant. It's so economical, you know. It's so brilliantly produced. It's got a drive to it. It's really a fabulous record. He made some classic records, Mark.
On that note, Chucky, we have got one last question for you, and it says, of all the musicians Bob has met or toured with, who would you most like to have spent some time with?
I think I know that Bob met David Bowie before he became a big star with really long hair. But maybe I'd like to have spent the time that Bob alluded to with Led Zeppelin in America. I think that would have been incredible.
When they invent time travel, Brian, I'll take you back to the Continental Hyatt House on Sunset Strip.
As long as you can record it for us. Well, thanks. I think that's it. We've reached the end of the mailbag.
Yes, I'm blowing the final grey whistle on this episode, and all that's left to do is to say huge thanks to Bob for joining us. It's been a total pleasure, Bob. Thank you very much.
I've loved it. Cheers to everybody.
Thanks, Bob.
So good to meet you.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. Brian and Matthew, thank you both as ever. It's been a pleasure.
Always. And thank you, everyone. And thank you, Bob.
And last but by no means least, a massive thanks to you out there for listening again. We really appreciate you joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to Life with Brian wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd love it if you shared the good word about us on your social media or down the pub with your mates. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram for news about episodes, video clips, and other daft bits and bobs, and we're at Brian McClare Pod. We'll be back soon, so we look forward to seeing you then.
Life with Brian. Life with Brian. Talking films or music. Life with Brian. Talking TV and food. Life with Brian. Talking trivia and exercise. Life with Brian. It's different every episode. Life with Brian. Talking politics and football. Life with Brian. It's different every episode. Life with Brian. Life with Brian.